February 11th, 1992. 2100 hours local time. Barents Sea, 12 nautical miles north of Severomorsk, Russian Federation. The water temperature is 2 degrees Celsius, just above freezing. USS Baton Rouge lies at 150 feet depth, moving at 3 knots through water so cold that condensation forms continuously on every metal surface inside the pressure hull. The submarine smells of amine and hydraulic fluid, machine oil, and the faint metallic tang of recycled air that has passed through carbon dioxide scrubbers for 72 consecutive hours without surfacing. The crew wears thermal layers beneath their poopy suits because the hull conducts Arctic cold through steel plating that is barely warm to the touch. This is the Barents Sea in February, a body of water where survival time after immersion is measured in minutes, where pack ice drifts south from the Arctic Circle, and where Soviet naval power has been concentrated since the 1950s. USS Baton Rouge is a Los Angeles-class fast attack submarine, hull number SSN 689, commissioned in 1977 and now in her 15th year of service. She displaces 6,900 tons submerged, stretches 362 feet from bow to stern, and is powered by a single S6G pressurized water reactor, driving a single shaft at speeds exceeding 30 knots when required. Her armament includes 4 21-inch torpedo tubes loaded with Mark 48 AD cap torpedoes and vertical launch tubes for Tomahawk cruise missiles. Her sonar suite is the BQQ-5D, the most advanced passive detection system in the United States Navy, capable of detecting broadband noise from Soviet submarines at ranges exceeding 50 nautical miles under favorable acoustic conditions. But tonight, acoustic conditions are not favorable. The Barents Sea is cluttered with biologics, schools of fish, shrimp clouds, and the ambient noise of commercial shipping transiting between Murmansk and the Atlantic. Thermal layers are unpredictable, sound propagation paths bend and distort, and Baton Rouge is operating inside what the Russians consider their territorial waters, conducting a mission that does not officially exist. The mission is designated Special Operations, a classification that appears in no public record and generates no written orders beyond the submarine force commander's eyes-only directive. Baton Rouge's objective is to service a seabed-mounted intelligence collection pod positioned on the continental shelf north of Severomorsk. The pod is a cylindrical device approximately 6 feet long, anchored to the ocean floor by concrete ballast, equipped with hydrophones that passively record acoustic signatures from submarines transiting in and out of the Northern Fleet's primary submarine base. The data is stored on magnetic tape inside a titanium pressure housing designed to withstand depth and temperature extremes. Every 6 months, an American submarine visits the pod, retrieves the recorded data, replaces the tape, checks battery levels, and departs before Russian anti-submarine warfare forces detect the intrusion. It is intelligence work conducted in the most dangerous possible environment, inside the operating area of an adversary who considers these waters sovereign territory and who maintains continuous patrol to prevent exactly this type of incursion. The Cold War officially ended 3 months ago. On December 26, 1991, the Soviet Union ceased to exist as a political entity. The hammer and sickle was lowered from the Kremlin flagpole and replaced by the tricolor of the Russian Federation. Mikhail Gorbachev resigned. Boris Yeltsin assumed power. The Communist Party lost its constitutional monopoly. 15 republics declared independence. The ideological confrontation that defined global politics for 46 years concluded without nuclear exchange, without invasion, without the apocalyptic Third World War that strategists had predicted since 1945. But in the Barents Sea, nothing has changed. Russian Northern Fleet submarines continue to patrol. American fast attack submarines continue to track them. Intelligence collection operations continue because the nuclear arsenal remains intact. The strategic bomber force remains on alert, and the ballistic missile submarines of the Northern Fleet remain capable of launching 500 warheads that could destroy every major city in the United States within 30 minutes of the order. The Soviet Union is dead. The espionage war is not. Commander, name withheld per operational security protocols, commands Baton Rouge during this mission. He is a career submariner with over 20 years of service, multiple deployments to the Barents and Norwegian seas, and a reputation for aggressive but prudent operations in contested waters. He understands that this mission exists in a legal grey area. The United States claims these waters are international, beyond the 12-mile territorial limit recognized by the law of the Sea Convention. Russia claims a straight baseline measurement that extends territorial waters further offshore, placing the intelligence pod inside Russian jurisdiction. If Baton Rouge is detected, Russia will protest diplomatically. If Baton Rouge is damaged or forced to surface, the incident will escalate to the highest levels of government. And if Baton Rouge is sunk, 73 crew members will die in water cold enough to stop a heart in 5 minutes. The approach to the pod location requires precise navigation. Baton Rouge uses inertial navigation, a system of gyroscopes and accelerometers that calculate position by integrating velocity and direction changes from a known starting point. GPS is not available at depth. Radio signals do not penetrate seawater. The submarine must rely on calculations updated periodically by surfacing to obtain navigation fixes from satellites or by using bottom contour mapping, comparing fathometer readings to known seabed. Topography. The pod is located at coordinates that are not recorded here, in water depth between 250 and 300 feet. Baton Rouge approaches from the north, moving slowly to minimize flow noise and cavitation from the propeller. The boat is rigged for ultra-quiet, all non-essential equipment secured, crew members walking rather than running, every valve turn conducted with deliberate care to avoid transient noise that Russian hydrophones might detect. If you are enjoying this investigation into history's hidden conflicts, please verify your subscription to the channel Cold War Chronicles. We declassify the past to understand the present. The sonar room aboard Baton Rouge is located forward of the control room, a cramped space dominated by consoles displaying cascading green waterfalls of acoustic data. 3 sonar technicians sit at their stations wearing sound-powered headsets, monitoring passive arrays that listen in all directions except directly astern. The BQQ-5D system integrates inputs from the bow-mounted spherical array, the conformal arrays along the hull, and, when deployed, the TB-16 towed array that streams behind the submarine on a cable, listening for low-frequency signatures that hull-mounted arrays cannot detect effectively. But the towed array is not deployed tonight. Deploying a towed array in shallow water near an enemy naval base is tactically unsound. The array can snag on seabed obstructions, create additional flow noise, and reduce the submarine's maneuverability. Baton Rouge is operating with hull-mounted arrays only, accepting the limitation that imposes. The limitation is significant. Los Angeles-class submarines have a blind spot, a 60-degree cone directly astern, where the propeller noise and flow turbulence mask incoming acoustic signals. Any target approaching from behind in that cone is effectively invisible to the submarine's passive sonar. The design trade-off was considered acceptable when the class was developed in the 1970s because submarines operating in open ocean can maneuver continuously, clearing their baffles by turning to present different aspects to potential threats. But in shallow water, near an enemy base, maneuvering options are constrained. Baton Rouge must hold course toward the pod location, minimizing speed and turns, accepting the risk that something could approach from astern without detection. At 2100 hours, Baton Rouge is 3 nautical miles from the pod location, maintaining course and depth. The control room is dimly lit. Red lamps provide illumination that preserves night vision for periscope watchers. The diving officer monitors trim, adjusting ballast and angle to maintain neutral buoyancy at depth. The helmsman and planesman control rudder and dive planes with minimal adjustments, responding to orders relayed from the officer of the deck. The captain stands near the plotting table, studying the navigation solution and reviewing the timeline for pod servicing. The operation requires Baton Rouge to hover near the seabed while a team of divers, yes, submarine divers trained in saturation diving techniques, exit through a lockout chamber, descend to the pod, conduct the retrieval and replacement of data tapes, and return to the submarine. Total time on station, approximately 90 minutes. Total vulnerability window, 90 minutes, during which Baton Rouge cannot maneuver aggressively without abandoning divers in lethal water. The geopolitical context makes this mission particularly sensitive. Russia is in chaos. The economy is collapsing. Military units are unpaid. Chain of command is fracturing as officers choose loyalty to new republics over loyalty to Moscow. But the Northern Fleet remains under centralized control, and its commanders remain deeply suspicious of American submarine operations near their bases. In January 1992, 1 month before this mission, a Russian patrol aircraft detected an American submarine operating near Severomorsk and dropped sonobuoys to track it. The submarine evaded, but the incident generated protests from Moscow and internal debates within the Pentagon about whether intelligence collection operations should continue during this transitional period. The decision was made to continue. The intelligence value of acoustic data from Russian submarines outweighs the political risk. But the risk is real. At 21:10 hours, the sonar operator reports a contact. Possible submerged contact, bearing 270, range unknown, very faint broadband, classification uncertain. The report is delivered in a calm, professional tone that belies the tension it creates. A submerged contact in this location means a Russian submarine, possibly one of the Northern Fleet's attack boats conducting a patrol, possibly a ballistic missile submarine transiting to or from patrol stations, possibly an anti-submarine warfare unit specifically deployed to detect American intrusions. The captain orders a course change to clear the baffles, a turn that allows the bow array to listen in the direction previously obscured by the propeller. Baton Rouge turns slowly to starboard, presenting her bow array toward the bearing of the contact. The sonar operator listens, filtering the acoustic data through decades of training and experience, comparing what he hears against the library of known signatures stored in his memory and in the sonar system's classification database. After 3 minutes, the operator reports: contact faded, possible biologic, no tonals detected. The contact is downgraded to non-threat. Baton Rouge resumes base course toward the pod, but the incident reminds every man aboard that they are operating in an environment where detection means mission failure, possible damage, and potential loss of life. At 21:15 hours, Baton Rouge reaches the pod location. The fathometer indicates bottom depth of 270 feet. The submarine slows to 1 knot and hovers at 150 feet, 120 feet above the seabed, using precise ballast adjustments to maintain position. The lockout chamber is prepared. 2 divers enter the chamber wearing dry suits, thermal undergarments, full-face masks with integrated communications, and rebreather systems that emit no bubbles. They carry tools, replacement data tapes, and battery packs in waterproof containers. The chamber is flooded, pressure is equalized with sea pressure at depth, and the outer hatch is opened. The divers exit into water so cold it penetrates every layer of insulation within seconds. They descend toward the seabed, guided by handheld sonar and compass bearings. For 30 minutes, Baton Rouge holds position while the divers locate the pod, open the access panel, retrieve the recorded tape, install a fresh tape, check battery voltage, close and secure the panel, and begin ascent back to the submarine. During those 30 minutes, Baton Rouge is essentially stationary, not drifting, not maneuvering, maintaining depth and position with minimal propeller activity. The submarine is blind astern. She is vulnerable. And somewhere in the dark water of the Barents Sea, another submarine is operating. At 21:16 hours, exactly as the divers are beginning their work on the seabed, a Russian Sierra-class submarine designated B-276 Kostroma is transiting submerged approximately 8 nautical miles southeast of Baton Rouge. Kostroma is a Project 945 submarine, one of the most advanced attack boats in the Russian Navy. She displaces 9,000 tons submerged, is powered by a pressurized water reactor, and is capable of 32 knots underwater. Her hull is constructed partially from titanium alloy, allowing operating depths exceeding 2,000 feet, far deeper than American Los Angeles-class submarines can safely operate. Her sonar suite is less capable than American systems, but adequate for detection at close range. And her mission tonight is routine patrol, transiting from Severomorsk to an assigned patrol area in the Norwegian Sea. Kostroma's captain does not know Baton Rouge is 12 miles north of his position. His sonar operators have detected no American submarine. The acoustic conditions are poor, and Baton Rouge has been maintaining ultra-quiet operations for hours. But Kostroma is on a converging course. She is proceeding northwest at moderate speed, and her track will bring her within detection range of Baton Rouge within the next hour. At 21:40 hours, the divers complete their work and signal readiness to return. They ascend slowly. Decompression protocols require staged ascent, even from relatively shallow depths, to prevent nitrogen bubble formation in blood and tissues. They reach the lockout chamber, enter, and the outer hatch is sealed. The chamber is drained. Pressure is equalized with internal submarine pressure, and the inner hatch opens. The divers climb out, carrying the retrieved data tape. 6 months of acoustic intelligence, now in American hands. The mission is complete. Baton Rouge can depart. But departure requires the submarine to turn, increase speed, and transit back toward international waters, using a different route than the approach to avoid establishing a predictable pattern. The captain orders ahead, 1/3, course 045, a northeast heading that will take Baton Rouge into deeper water before turning west toward the Norwegian Sea. At 21:45 hours, Baton Rouge is accelerating through 4 knots, beginning a slow turn to starboard. The submarine is still operating in ultra-quiet mode, but the increase in speed generates increased flow noise and propeller wash. The BQQ-5D sonar continues passive monitoring, listening for threats in all directions except the 60-degree blind spot astern. And at 21:50 hours, B-276 Kostroma, having completed her transit from Severomorsk, begins emergency blow procedures to surface for a communications session with fleet headquarters. Russian submarines do not have the continuous at-depth communication capability that American submarines possess through extremely low-frequency systems. To communicate, they must surface or come to periscope depth and extend a radio mast. Kostroma's captain orders surface. High-pressure air is released into ballast tanks, displacing seawater, generating positive buoyancy. The submarine begins ascending rapidly from 200 feet depth, and Kostroma is directly beneath Baton Rouge. Neither submarine knows the other is there. Baton Rouge cannot detect Kostroma because the Russian submarine is in the 60-degree blind spot astern and below. Kostroma cannot detect Baton Rouge because she is conducting an emergency blow, a loud procedure that masks all acoustic input with the roar of high-pressure air flooding ballast tanks. Both submarines are moving. Both submarines are at approximately the same geographic position, and both submarines are about to collide. The collision occurs at 20:16 hours local time, 8:16 p.m. on February 11th, 1992. Kostroma's sail, the vertical structure rising from her hull, housing periscopes, radio masts, and surface control stations, strikes Baton Rouge's aft section with 9,000 tons of titanium-reinforced steel, moving upward at approximately 8 miles per hour. The impact point is along Baton Rouge's port side, aft of the sail, directly over the ballast tanks that control the submarine's buoyancy. The sound is not an explosion. It is a grinding, tearing shriek of metal on metal that resonates through the pressure hull like a bell struck with a hammer. Every man aboard feels it. A shudder that travels from stern to bow, accompanied by the unmistakable sensation of the hull being pushed sideways by an external force. In the control room, the diving officer is thrown against his console. The helmsman grips his controls as the rudder is forced hard to starboard by the collision, overriding his input. Depth gauges spike. Baton Rouge is being pushed upward by Kostroma's ascending mass. Ballast tanks rupturing, seawater flooding spaces that are supposed to contain air. The captain orders emergency procedures without knowing what has hit his submarine. All stop! Damage report! Sonar! Report contacts! The sonar operator's voice is tight with adrenaline. Contact astern! Massive return! Range 0! Classify as submarine Sierra class, directly beneath us. Kostroma continues her ascent. Her sail has torn through Baton Rouge's outer hull, the non-pressure hull that houses ballast tanks and provides hydrodynamic shaping. 2 gashes, each several feet long, are ripped into the port ballast tank. High-pressure air that was maintaining neutral buoyancy vents into the surrounding seawater. Seawater rushes into spaces designed to be dry. Baton Rouge loses buoyancy control on the port side and begins a 10-degree list. The diving officer fights to compensate, flooding starboard tanks to level the boat, but the damage is too extensive. The submarine continues listing, reaching 15 degrees before stabilizing. Kostroma breaks the surface 70 feet astern of Baton Rouge. Her sail, now visibly dented along the forward edge, rises into the Arctic night. Russian lookouts emerge onto the bridge and immediately see the American submarine ahead of them, also on the surface, listing, with visible damage along the port side. Both submarines are now surfaced, 12 nautical miles north of Severomorsk, in water that Russia claims as territorial sea, and the United States claims as international waters. Both submarines have sustained damage. Neither captain knows if the other submarine's reactor is intact, if there is risk of radiation release, if the collision has created casualties. Aboard Baton Rouge, the damage control teams report to their stations. The engineering officer conducts a rapid assessment of the reactor compartment. The reactor itself is intact, no radiation leakage, no coolant loss, reactor controls responding normally. But the pressure hull has been compromised. The collision did not tear through into habitable spaces, but stress fractures are detected in welds near the impact point. Metal fatigue analysis will be required to determine if the hull can sustain deep diving. For now, the submarine is restricted to shallow depths, no deeper than periscope depth, no emergency dives, no high-speed maneuvering that might stress damaged sections. The ballast tank damage is catastrophic from an operational perspective. Baton Rouge cannot dive safely. The ruptured tanks cannot hold air. Attempting to submerge would result in uncontrolled flooding and loss of the boat. The submarine must return to port on the surface, a transit of over 400 nautical miles through the Barents Sea, around the northern coast of Norway, and south to a NATO facility, where damage can be assessed and temporary repairs made before attempting the Atlantic crossing back to the United States. The captain makes the immediate tactical decision: break contact, withdraw from Russian territorial waters, or what Russia claims as territorial waters, and establish communication with Submarine Force Command. Baton Rouge has an extremely low-frequency receiver that can receive emergency action messages while submerged, but transmitting requires surfacing and extending a radio mast or satellite antenna. Now that the submarine is on the surface, communication is possible. The radio officer establishes encrypted satellite link and transmits a flash message. Baton Rouge collided with Russian Sierra-class submarine. Position 12 miles north, Severomorsk. Surfaced. Reactor secure. Casualties none. Ballast tanks ruptured. Unable to submerge. Require immediate guidance. The message reaches Submarine Force Headquarters within minutes. The duty officer wakes the Admiral. The Admiral contacts the Chief of Naval Operations. The CNO contacts the Secretary of Defense. Within 1 hour, the incident is briefed to President George H.W. Bush. The diplomatic implications are immediately clear. An American submarine, conducting intelligence operations inside or near Russian territorial waters, has collided with a Russian submarine just 2 months after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. The Russian government will protest. The media will demand answers. Congress will investigate. And Baton Rouge must somehow return to port without further incident. Russian reaction is swift. Kostroma transmits her own report to Northern Fleet headquarters. Patrol aircraft are launched to overfly the collision site. Surface vessels, patrol boats and a frigate are dispatched to the area. Russian officials demand that Baton Rouge remain on the surface, allow Russian inspection, and provide an explanation for her presence. American officials refuse. The submarine is in international waters by American interpretation and is not subject to Russian jurisdiction. The diplomatic standoff escalates, but Baton Rouge cannot remain on station. The submarine is damaged, vulnerable, and exposed on the surface in Arctic conditions, where pack ice is a navigational hazard and storm systems can generate 20-foot seas. The captain orders course southwest, speed 12 knots, fast enough to make progress toward friendly waters, slow enough to avoid stressing the damaged hull. Baton Rouge begins her transit. The crew secures the submarine for extended surface operations. Lookouts are posted on the bridge in rotating watches because hypothermia is a constant risk. The temperature is 15 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit when wind chill is factored. Lookouts wear extreme cold weather gear, but exposure is still limited to 30-minute rotations. Below, in the engine room, the engineering crew monitors propulsion systems continuously. Any failure now, a shaft, bearing seizing, a steam line rupturing, could leave the submarine dead in the water, hundreds of miles from assistance. Navigation becomes critical. Baton Rouge must transit through waters where Russian patrol activity is heavy. The submarine has no ability to dive if detected. If Russian forces decide to intercept, using patrol boats, helicopters, or even another submarine, Baton Rouge has no evasion options. The boat is a sitting target, relying entirely on American diplomatic assertions that she is in international waters and entitled to innocent passage. On the night of February 12th, 30 hours after the collision, a Russian patrol aircraft overflies Baton Rouge and drops flares, illuminating the submarine in harsh white light. Photographs are taken. Russian reconnaissance assets document the damage, the list, the compromised ballast tanks. The aircraft circles twice, then departs. The message is clear. Russia is watching. Russia knows exactly where Baton Rouge is, and Russia could act if the political decision is made. But the political decision is not made. Boris Yeltsin, the president of the newly independent Russian Federation, has no interest in escalating a submarine incident into a diplomatic crisis that could threaten Western economic assistance Russia desperately needs. The Northern Fleet is ordered to monitor but not intercept. Kostroma, having assessed her own damage, dented sail, superficial, repairable, returns to Severomorsk. She will be repaired within weeks and return to service. Russian sailors, reportedly, paint a small victory mark on her sail, an informal notation that she rammed an American submarine and survived. Baton Rouge continues southwest. The transit takes 5 days. The submarine transits the Norwegian Sea, passing north of Norway, avoiding commercial shipping lanes, maintaining radio silence except for position updates to Submarine Force Command. The crew operates in a heightened state of alert because at any moment, a hull fracture could propagate, a weld could fail, a flooding event could occur that would require emergency procedures with no margin for error. On February 16th, 4 days after the collision, Baton Rouge reaches the Norwegian coast and enters a fjord where a NATO support facility provides secure mooring. Norwegian engineers conduct initial damage assessment. The findings are sobering. The ballast tank ruptures are repairable but require dry dock facilities. More concerning are the stress fractures in the pressure hull. Metallurgical analysis indicates that the collision generated shock loads beyond design limits. Welds have micro cracks. Hull plates show deformation. The submarine is not safe for deep diving without comprehensive structural repair that would require cutting out damaged sections, welding in new hull plates, recertifying the pressure hull to design depth, a process that would take months and cost tens of millions of dollars. The decision is made at the highest levels of the Navy, Baton Rouge will return to the United States for full assessment, but preliminary analysis suggests the cost of repair will exceed the remaining service life value of the submarine. Los Angeles-class submarines have a nominal 33-year service life. Baton Rouge, commissioned in 1977, is 15 years old, halfway through her expected service. But the class is being built in large numbers, with newer Flight 2 and Flight 3 variants incorporating improved quieting, better sonar, and vertical launch systems. Repairing an older Flight 1 boat with compromised structural integrity when newer boats are available does not make economic sense. Temporary repairs are made in Norway, enough to allow Baton Rouge to cross the Atlantic on the surface at slow speed. The submarine departs Norway on March 1, 1992, and begins the transit westward. The crossing takes 12 days. Baton Rouge arrives at the United States Navy submarine base, New London, in Groton, Connecticut, on March 13th. She is placed in dry dock. Full structural assessment is conducted. The assessment confirms the preliminary findings. The pressure hull has sustained damage that compromises safety at depth. Repair cost estimate: $80 million. Refueling the reactor, scheduled for 1995, would cost an additional $200 million. Total cost to return Baton Rouge to full operational status: approximately $280 million. Cost to build a new Los Angeles-class submarine: $900 million. But the Navy does not need another Los Angeles-class submarine. 62 have been built. The class is mature, and production is winding down in favor of the Seawolf class and the planned Virginia class. The decision is made in late 1992. USS Baton Rouge will be decommissioned. The submarine that spent 15 years conducting intelligence operations, tracking Soviet submarines, deploying in every ocean, operating in the most dangerous waters of the Cold War, is declared unfit for further service due to damage from a collision that lasted less than 2 seconds. Decommissioning occurs on January 13, 1995. The crew is dispersed to other submarines. The nuclear fuel is removed. The reactor compartment is defueled and secured. Baton Rouge is towed to Puget Sound Naval Shipyard in Washington State, where the ship's submarine recycling program systematically dismantles her. The hull is cut into sections. Non-radioactive sections are scrapped. The reactor compartment, sealed and encased in concrete, is transported to the Hanford site in Washington for long-term storage. By September 30, 1997, USS Baton Rouge ceases to exist as a physical object. She is reduced to documentation, photographs, and the memories of the men who served aboard her. Kostroma, by contrast, is repaired and returns to service. She continues operating with the Russian Northern Fleet until 2014, when she is finally decommissioned after 30 years of service. The dent in her sail from the collision remains visible throughout her service life, a permanent mark of the encounter. Russian sailors refer to the incident with pride. Their submarine survived a collision with an American spy submarine and forced that submarine out of service. Whether this is propaganda or accurate interpretation is debatable, but the symbolism is powerful in Russian naval culture. The diplomatic fallout from the collision continues for months. Russia protests formally through diplomatic channels, arguing that Baton Rouge was operating inside territorial waters conducting espionage. The United States rejects the protest, insisting the submarine was in international waters conducting routine operations. Though routine operations is a euphemism that fools no one. Both governments understand what happened. Both governments choose not to escalate. The incident is discussed in classified briefings, analyzed in intelligence assessments, and filed in archives that will not be declassified for decades. For the crew of USS Baton Rouge, the collision is the defining event of their service. They survived. No one was injured. No one died. But their submarine, the boat they lived in, worked in, trusted with their lives, was destroyed by 2 seconds of violence beneath the Arctic Sea. Some crew members transfer to other submarines and continue their careers. Others leave the Navy, the collision having broken something intangible about their confidence in the machinery that keeps submariners alive in an environment where human beings cannot survive unprotected. The intelligence data retrieved from the seabed pod, the mission objective that brought Baton Rouge to Severomorsk, is analyzed by the National Security Agency and the Office of Naval Intelligence. The acoustic recordings provide 6 months of data on Russian submarine transiting patterns, reactor noise signatures, and propeller cavitation characteristics. The intelligence value is assessed as significant. The mission, despite the collision, is considered successful from an intelligence perspective. The cost, one Los Angeles-class submarine written off as a constructive total loss, is accepted as the price of Cold War espionage operations that continue even after the Cold War officially ends. The collision between USS Baton Rouge and B-276 Kostroma was not an isolated incident. It was one event in a pattern of submarine collisions that occurred throughout the Cold War and continued into the post-Soviet era. Between 1960 and 1993, at least 9 documented collisions occurred between American and Soviet submarines conducting intelligence operations in contested waters. The true number is almost certainly higher, because not all incidents were disclosed, and some collisions may have occurred without either side knowing the other submarine's identity. The first documented collision occurred on June 20th, 1970, when USS Tautog struck a Soviet Echo-class cruise missile submarine near Petropavlovsk in the Sea of Okhotsk. The Soviet submarine was conducting a baffle-clearing maneuver, turning sharply to allow sonar arrays to listen in directions normally obscured by propeller noise, when Tautog, which had been trailing at close range, failed to react in time. The collision tore sections of the Soviet submarine's outer hull, but did not penetrate the pressure hull. Both submarines surfaced. Neither government acknowledged the incident publicly. In May 1974, USS Pintado collided head-on with a Soviet Yankee-class ballistic missile submarine near Petropavlovsk. The impact damaged both submarines' bow sections. Pintado withdrew immediately and returned to Pearl Harbor for emergency repairs. The Soviet submarine limped back to port. Again, neither government issued public statements, because acknowledging the collision would require explaining what both submarines were doing in the same location at the same time. On November 3, 1974, a Soviet Victor-class attack submarine collided with USS James Madison, an Ohio-class ballistic missile submarine, just outside Holy Loch, Scotland, a major American submarine base. The Soviet submarine had penetrated British territorial waters to intercept James Madison as she departed for patrol. The collision occurred in shallow water near the harbor entrance. Both submarines surfaced immediately. The Soviet submarine withdrew at high speed before Royal Navy vessels could respond. The incident generated diplomatic protests, but no public disclosure of details. The pattern is consistent. American submarines conducting close surveillance of Soviet naval bases, Soviet submarines attempting to track American boomers departing for patrol, both sides operating in confined waters with limited sonar detection ranges, and collisions occurring when evasive maneuvers fail or when one submarine is in the other's sonar blind spot. The Baton Rouge collision fits this pattern perfectly. She was conducting intelligence operations near Severomorsk. Kostroma was transiting from the same base. Both were operating in shallow water, where acoustic conditions degrade sonar performance. And the collision occurred because Kostroma surfaced directly beneath Baton Rouge's blind spot astern, a 60-degree cone where Los Angeles-class submarines cannot detect contacts using passive sonar. The blind spot is not a design flaw. It is an inherent characteristic of submarine acoustic arrays. Passive sonar requires hydrophones to detect sound propagating through water. The hydrophones are mounted in the bow, along the hull, and, on some submarines, in a towed array streamed behind the boat. But the propeller generates noise and creates turbulence that masks acoustic signals coming from astern. The solution is periodic baffle-clearing maneuvers, turning the submarine to present the bow array toward the previously obscured sector. but baffle clearing generates flow noise and alerts adversary submarines that a maneuver is in progress. In hostile waters near enemy bases, submarine commanders often choose to accept the blind spot rather than risk detection from maneuvering. The question asked after every collision is the same. Could it have been prevented? The analysis conducted after the Baton Rouge incident identified multiple contributing factors, but no single point of failure. Baton Rouge was operating in shallow water, where sonar performance is degraded by bottom reverberation and biological noise. She was conducting ultra-quiet operations, which meant limiting active sonar pings that would have detected Kostroma, but would also have revealed Baton Rouge's presence. She was focused on mission completion, recovering the intelligence pod and withdrawing, rather than defensive maneuvering. And she was subject to the fundamental limitation that submarines, despite advanced technology, are operating in an environment where situational awareness is always incomplete. Sonar provides information about what generates noise. It does not provide complete knowledge of everything present in the surrounding water. A quiet submarine, using minimal propulsion, can approach to collision range without detection, especially if approaching from the blind spot. Kostroma's captain made a decision that contributed directly to the collision. Emergency blow to surface for communications. Emergency blow is a procedure where high-pressure air is released into ballast tanks simultaneously, generating rapid positive buoyancy and forcing the submarine upward at maximum rate. The procedure is loud. The sound of air rushing into tanks is audible for miles. It is used in emergencies when the submarine must reach the surface as quickly as possible. But it was not an emergency that night. Kostroma was conducting routine communications, a scheduled radio session that could have been accomplished by slow ascent to periscope depth, extending a radio mast, and surfacing only if necessary. Emergency blow was unnecessary. But Russian submarine doctrine at the time emphasized speed and boldness. Soviet captains were trained to surface quickly, establish communications, and submerge before adversary forces could react. This doctrine prioritized operational tempo over stealth. In this case, it resulted in collision. The diplomatic aftermath lasted months. The United States maintained that Baton Rouge was in international waters conducting routine operations. Russia, speaking through the newly formed Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, maintained that American submarines routinely violated territorial waters and conducted espionage that violated international law. Neither position is entirely accurate. The Law of the Sea Convention recognizes a 12 nautical mile territorial sea measured from coastal baselines. Beyond 12 miles is international waters where freedom of navigation applies. But Russia claims straight baselines connecting headlands rather than following coastal indentations, which extends territorial claims further offshore. The United States does not recognize these extended claims. Therefore, waters that Russia considers territorial are waters the United States considers international. Submarines operate in this ambiguous zone continuously. The intelligence mission that brought Baton Rouge to Severomorsk continued after the collision. The seabed pods were not abandoned. Other submarines assumed the mission. The acoustic data collection continued because the intelligence value justified the risk. Even after the Soviet Union dissolved, American submarines monitored Russian naval activity because the strategic threat did not disappear when the political system changed. The Northern Fleet still operated ballistic missile submarines capable of launching nuclear strikes against the United States. The Pacific Fleet still patrolled from Vladivostok and Petropavlovsk. Intelligence collection, knowing where Russian submarines operate, how quiet they are, what acoustic signatures they generate, remained a priority. Los Angeles-class submarines conducted these missions throughout the 1990s and into the 21st century, long after the Cold War officially ended. The class proved adaptable to post-Cold War missions that differed significantly from the carrier battle group screening role for which they were originally designed. Their speed allowed rapid deployment to evolving crises. Their stealth allowed covert monitoring of regional conflicts without provoking escalation. Their sensors, including electronic surveillance systems beyond just sonar, allowed collection of signals, intelligence, radar emissions, and communications intercepts. Their Tomahawk cruise missiles allowed strike capability against land targets over 1,000 miles inland. And their special operations capability allowed covert insertion of Navy SEALs for missions that required deniability. If you have found this investigation into the hidden submarine operations of the post-Cold War era compelling, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Cold War Chronicles, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story of the men who operated in silence beneath contested waters. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from, or if you or your family members served aboard submarines during these dangerous years. Every like, every comment, every subscription helps preserve these stories and ensures that more people learn about the missions that shaped the invisible war. You are part of keeping these memories alive, and we are grateful for that contribution. The legacy of USS Baton Rouge is complex. She was one of 62 Los Angeles-class submarines built between 1972 and 1996, the most numerous class of nuclear submarines ever constructed. She served for 15 years, conducting missions in every ocean, tracking Soviet submarines, deploying to the Mediterranean during regional conflicts, operating under the Arctic ice cap, and conducting intelligence operations that generated information used by national command authorities to assess Soviet capabilities and intentions. Her collision with Kostroma ended her career prematurely, but it did not diminish the contributions she made during those 15 years. The crew of Baton Rouge, 73 men who served aboard during that final deployment, returned home without fanfare. No public ceremony acknowledged their mission or the collision. The submarine force does not conduct public celebrations of covert operations. The men dispersed to other boats, other duty stations, and eventually to civilian life. Some speak about the collision in general terms. Others maintain silence, bound by security classifications that remain in effect decades later. But all understand that they participated in operations that continued the Espionage war even after the ideological conflict concluded. Submarine collisions continue into the present era, though less frequently as acoustic technology improves and operational protocols become more conservative. In March 1998, USS Kentucky collided with a Russian submarine in the Sea of Japan. In 2009, HMS Vanguard, a British ballistic missile submarine, collided with Le Triomphant, a French ballistic missile submarine in the Atlantic Ocean. Both were nuclear-armed, both were operating covertly, and neither detected the other before impact. The collision damaged both submarines, but did not compromise nuclear weapons or reactors. In 2021, USS Connecticut struck an undersea mountain in the South China Sea, causing injuries to crew members and forcing the submarine to surface for emergency transit to Guam. The navigation error that caused that collision generated investigations, reliefs of command, and procedural changes designed to prevent recurrence. But the fundamental challenge remains unchanged from 1992. Submarines operate in an environment where complete situational awareness is impossible. Sonar is not radar. It does not provide precise bearing, range, and altitude on all targets in all directions at all times. It provides acoustic data that must be interpreted by trained operators who distinguish biologics from machinery, classify contacts based on tonal characteristics, and estimate range using propagation models that depend on water temperature, salinity, depth, and bottom composition. Mistakes are possible. Gaps in coverage exist. And when two submarines occupy the same water volume without mutual awareness, collision is not just possible, it is inevitable. The Baton Rouge collision occurred because both submarines were present in the same location, operating covertly, using passive sensors with inherent limitations, in water conditions that degraded detection range, and conducting maneuvers. Baton Rouge accelerating after mission completion, Kostroma emergency blowing to surface, without knowledge that another submarine was nearby. No individual decision caused the collision. The collision resulted from the accumulation of operational choices, environmental conditions, technical limitations, and random chance. The broader lesson is that submarine espionage, despite technological advancement, remains an inherently dangerous activity. Every submarine that deploys to contested waters accepts risk that cannot be eliminated. Improved sonar reduces that risk, but does not eliminate it. Better navigation prevents some collisions, but not all. Enhanced communication allows coordination, but only when both parties communicate. And the fundamental asymmetry remains. Submarines conducting covert operations do not communicate, because communication reveals presence. Therefore, submarines operating in the same area do not know each other's positions. And occasionally they collide. USS Baton Rouge was recycled in 1997. Her hull was cut apart, her reactor compartments sealed, and her material returned to the industrial supply chain or disposed of as low-level radioactive waste. The crew moved on. The mission continued with other boats, and the seabed intelligence pod north of Severomorsk continued recording acoustic data until satellite technology and improved underwater vehicles made manned submarine visits unnecessary. The mission changed. The technology evolved. But the fundamental reality did not. Intelligence collection in hostile waters requires submarines to operate where detection means failure. And sometimes, failure means collision. This is Cold War Chronicles. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the invisible war beneath the Arctic seas, please subscribe and turn on notifications. We have only just scratched the surface of the secrets buried beneath the ice. Thank you for ensuring that the men of USS Baton Rouge and every submarine crew who operated in silence are not forgotten. Their service protected national security at personal risk, and their stories deserve to be told to every generation that benefits from the freedom they defended.